Now then, to the United States, and Hillary Clinton got that right, won a resounding victory in last night's South Carolina primary. It's a win that looks set to add momentum to her campaign for the Democratic nomination ahead of Super Tuesday this week. And I spoke to her former innovations advisor, Alec Ross. He's the author of a new book, The Industries of the Future, about how technology will change the world we live in. I started by asking him what those industries will be.
Well, there are going to be a handful of things that shape the world over the next 10 years as much as the internet has shaped the world over the last 20. From artificial intelligence and robotics to the commercialization of genomics to big data. I think we're at an inflection point where change is going to happen at us very, very fast.
Okay, and how is it going to happen? Is it all going to happen more and more through the innovator, the entrepreneur, individuals and groups, or does the state have a role to play as well?
I think the state has a role, but it's a much diminished role relative to what it was in the industrial age or in the agricultural age. I think that innovation and economic change is ever more propelled by entrepreneurs. It's by people in basements who come up with great ideas that they turn into products, that they get investment, that they unleash into the world.
And in the global terms, I mean, the big thought here, we see that most, I think nearly all of the global tech companies are from the United States. Are we going to see that change? Are we going to see it spread around the globe? Could we see an African Google or Apple or something like that?
Absolutely. So one of the theses of my book, The Industries of the Future, is the last 20 years were great for this little narrow piece of California called Silicon Valley. But I do believe that over the next 10 years, there will be 10 or 12 places around the world. London, by the way, which I think could very well be one of them. And they may not equal Silicon Valley, but I think very big businesses are going to be created by the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings in a dozen places around the world that aren't American.
But what is, is there something we can learn that the rest of the world can learn from Silicon Valley in particular? Is there a formula that they've got right that others so far are not doing?
Well, there are things that can be done. First of all, you have to create the conditions that lend themselves to very early stage high risk investment. So you can't be risk averse at all. And I think that people are beginning to pick up on this. Secondly, I think there's a cultural bit to it. I'm 44 years old. And when I'm in government ranks, I'm typically among the youngest people, among the youngest at the table. But when I'm in Silicon Valley, I'm among the oldest. And so I think culturally recognizing that somebody in their 20s or 30s ought to be invested in is important as well. And then lastly, I think you need a spirit of audacity. You can't just innovate incrementally. You have to have a big idea. Everybody tells you you're going to fail, and you go right at it. And I think more people are picking up on that.
Tell me about some of the concerns you touched on earlier there, in particular artificial intelligence and robotics. I don't know if this is a silly question or not, but if some of the people you've been sitting in rooms with are sitting in rooms in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years hence, might they be sitting with entities other than humans? How far can it go?
That's not a silly question at all, Dermot. I think the robots of the cartoons and movies from the 1970s are going to be the reality of the 2020s. And I'll spare you all the details why. But the rise of artificial intelligence is going to take robots from doing work that we just think of as manual, the work of men with big, strong shoulders in ports, factories, and mills. And it will increasingly do work that is cognitive, do the work of men and women with white collars. And so this is going to change labor. And this is why the industries of the future is not utopian and it's not dystopian. It isn't, I don't write to say, oh, everything's going to be great. We're going to live lives of abundance. But nor do I write it from the fetal position and sort of fists clenched, railing against the future. It's going to be tricky.
Let me ask you more about the state versus the corporations, and some people see them as being in cahoots, but we see right now in the United States one of the big battles, I think, which will define a lot of the issues for the future, and I'm talking about Apple versus the FBI over one phone and creating the technology to unlock it.
That's right. So 80% of the time, I will side with law enforcement and the intelligence services. I worked in government. I understand that perspective. In this case, though, I think the FBI is making a mistake. And the reason why I think the FBI is making a mistake is it's not really about one phone. What they want Apple to do is redevelop their iOS software and make it easier to walk into a back door. The problem with that is that if you are creating a backdoor for GCHQ or for the FBI, the Chinese can walk through it. The Russians can walk through it. And so I do think that as our networks become more security sensitive, we actually need more encryption.
You, of course, worked for Hillary Clinton while she was Secretary of State, and there was and still is lots of question marks about why she seemed to communicate through email on her personal account. Tens of thousands of emails, some of which have been released. Do you know, she said she made a mistake, but do you know why she did it?
You know, I haven't asked her why she did it. I have a feeling she probably wasn't paying that much attention to her own email. I mean, she's 67 years old. She's not a geek by nature. I have a feeling that, you know, somebody else said, oh, we're going to do this. We think it's in your best interest. And she probably nodded and said, okay, and now has to live with the implications of that choice.
And do you think it's going to be an issue in the election campaign, particularly if it is Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton?
Well, if it's Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, I hope to God Almighty that something more than emails are determining the election.
Do you think it will be Donald Trump? I mean, looking as a Democrat on the Republican side.
It looks like it. I mean, it looks like Donald Trump has tapped into the anxiety that lots of people in the United States feel. He's figured out how to take that anxiety and turn it into anger, and is directing that anger. He's saying, hey, it's the establishment's fault. It's brown people's fault. It's people of low incomes who are now in our National Health Service who you have to pay for. I think he's demented. I think he's vulgar. I think he's a horrible human being. But he's also a communications genius.
Pulling your punches there. What about on the Democrat side, Bernie Sanders? That would make it very, very strange for the United States, wouldn't it, be having someone so far to the right and someone so far to the left?
A socialist versus a fascist. Who would have ever guessed? I do think that Hillary Clinton is well positioned to beat Bernie Sanders. I do think, though, that here, too, as with Donald Trump, I think that Bernie Sanders has tapped into something. I think he also has identified the anxiety of people, particularly young people in his case, people who are in their 20s, who've got loads of university debt, who have a hard time making it into the work world, and he sort of laid out a vision for them. And so I think it's a bit tricky for some people who are more centrist and more pragmatic, like Hillary, to make their way through this very loud political environment.
And lastly, Mr. Ross, give us your thoughts. I mean, and it's back to what we were talking about earlier, and the industries of the future and the needs for open, welcoming economies, I suppose free movements of people as well. And I want to relate it to the debate that's been had in the UK right now about membership of the European Union, to remain or to leave. What are your thoughts on which way the UK should go?
Well, I'll be honest. I think that as an American, what I think is less important than what any citizen of the United Kingdom thinks. Having said that, I do think that in a world that is growing more connected, the idea that Great Britain would disconnect itself a little bit more, I think would make it more difficult economically. I mean, it's hard to posit that London or Cambridge or other centers of innovation are going to be home to people from all over the world starting businesses if suddenly it's really an island unto itself and not part of a larger whole.
Well, we must end it there. Mr. Ross, great seeing you. Alec Ross, best of luck with the book, The Industries of the Future.
Thank you for having me.